This program is brought to you by thepodcastfactory.com.
Ben Settle, compulsively punchable.
He's the kind of guy who you'd probably just punch on the arm really hard if you ever met him.
Worshipped by feminists.
He pokes fun at feminism and women, just joking around, his whole sandwich making thing.
Mildly inspiring.
Yes, I recommend the Ben Settle Show, and anybody who isn't on it, that's their own loss.
Somewhat authentic.
Ben is a very distinct personality. There's no fluff. I can't stand fluff.
Syrupy sweet.
Tells it like it is, and sometimes may not be the most polite manner, shall we say.
Kind of useful.
So I have spent tens of thousands of dollars on coaching and masterminds, and I've learned more from Ben Settle's podcast than from any of that.
Semi-intelligent.
Ben sounds like a crazy guy at times, but he's one of the smartest individuals in marketing I've ever met.
Mostly forgettable.
He's always in the forefront of my mind.
The BenSettle.com podcast begins now.
This is Ben Settle, BenSettle.com podcast. And okay, Jonathan, let me tell you a little. I like to use these Wing Chun examples because it just amuses me for some reason, and because I always learn some weird thing in Wing Chun that I can apply to business. Some of these things are more applicable than others to most people, but I think this thing will pretty much apply to anyone and using any kind of media, and that is this idea of how opposing force creates vulnerability. Now, here's how it works. So I'm training with Sifu one day, and he was explaining to me like how, if you're just going to come in trying to use brute strength and all that, you're really not fighting at the best capacity you can. He goes, you can't, if you're going to go up against this huge guy and you're going to try to oppose whatever, a punch or a kick, or he's trying to push you or grab you, if you try to oppose that, if you struggle against that and you try to meet it, you actually create a lot of vulnerability. It's just like if you want to do brute strength versus brute strength, you do something else. But Wing Chun is a lot different. You're actually using that strength that's coming at you against them. You don't try to oppose it. You accept it. And so one of the examples these guys like to use is, let's imagine a car's driving. Imagine, Jonathan, that I'm driving my car right at you.
Okay.
For some reason, you and we had a falling out, and you're in the middle of the street, and you're just minding your own business, and, la-da-da-da-da. I see you. I put the car in drive and I speed at you as fast as I possibly can. And you see me coming, right? You see me coming. So there's a 2,000-pound car, however much my car weighs, and then there's you. Okay. Are you going to try to oppose that force? You're going to
run right at you?
You're going to run at me? You're going to try to fight that force?
No.
Or are you going to step out of the way?
Yeah.
Right? When something's coming at you, you don't try to oppose it. Or what you do is you create vulnerability. This applies to fighting, it applies to business, applies to a lot of things. In fact, I once did a video about this, about vulnerability. It's not the same thing. But for example, if you want to, a lot of people are out there talking about, you got to be vulnerable. You got to show the vulnerable side and all this stuff that people do for some reason that makes no sense to me unless they have a purpose for it other than to just show how vulnerable they are. Well, if you want to show vulnerability, simply take an action. Like, send an email, you're actually creating a vulnerability. Like anything you do, me putting this podcast out creates a vulnerability. There's something, this podcast could be used against me in some way. Every email I send could be used against me in some way. And so that's what I'm talking about. We all have vulnerabilities. And whenever you take an action, you make yourself vulnerable, but that's fine. You can't do nothing. So, that kind of vulnerability is fine. What's not fine is the kind of vulnerability you create when you oppose a force. So again, let's say you're in business, like everyone hopefully listening to this is in business, and you're just getting started out. You have a very small ad budget. You don't have a lot of money to spend on advertising, but all of your competitors do. And they're running all these space ads and newspaper ads and banner ads. They're paying for solo email ads. They're paying for Google AdWords and Facebook ads. They're just washing the whole market with their advertising because they have the budget for that. For whatever reason, maybe they've been around longer or whatever, and they're successful, and you're just starting out, fresh off the turnip truck. You can't oppose that. You're not going to be able to out-advertise them. If you did, you're going to create a huge vulnerability. You're going to go broke within like a week, just trying to keep up with that. So you have to find smarter ways of dealing with it. Like, for example, building a list and emailing it every day. Jonathan, I don't know. I know that surprises you when I talk about that.
Shocking.
But that's one way where you're not opposing force. When you create your own media, create your own audience, and the way they're doing it, but you're doing it in your own terms, and you can actually stay in the game a lot longer. That's how people get going. What's the story? Who's Marty Edelson's story when he founded Boardroom Magazine or Boardroom Newsletter, whatever it was. And he hired Gene Schwartz, the late great copywriter Gene Schwartz, for $3,500. It was the last $3,500 Marty Edelson had.
Wow.
And he was competing against business magazines basically, because that was the whole point of it, how to read get to the heart of 350 business magazines, in 30 minutes or whatever it was, whatever the headline was. But that's what he was doing. Like, he wasn't trying to compete against all of them. He was being smart about it. He would, if he tried to out advertise and go against all the popular business magazines of the day and try to compete against them and say, here's why we're the best, blah, blah, blah. He probably would have went broke. That 3,500 wouldn't have lasted very long. But that's not what he did. He didn't oppose the force. He took that force, that power out there, which is all the competing business magazines. It was coming. He took that force. He stepped out of the way of it. He accepted it and then used it against the market by saying, okay, I'm going to show you how to use all their we're going to take the best of all their stuff and put it in one little newsletter. And it's pretty brilliant if you think about it, actually. And it's an example of not creating vulnerability by not opposing force, by going with the force. Use the force, young Jedi. Jonathan, use the force. Don't try to fight it. Don't try to go against it. Don't try to step in the way of the moving truck. Just get out of the way and try to use it somehow to your advantage. I'll give a real life example I like to give of this. And this is going to be a very short podcast, Jonathan. And I know that you like long ones where I speak just to hear myself talk, but I'm going to leave with an example of this because it's really a simple concept. It's a very simple concept. Here's how I've done it in email, and anybody can do the same thing, especially if you sell information. Once upon a time, I have this ebook on Kindle called Blue Chip Email Secrets. And it's basically an interview format where Michael Sunoff interviewed me about emails several years ago. I just put the transcript in a book and I've sold it. I wrote an ad for it and I sold it. It has no table of contents. There's no way of sorting through it. There's no way of easily searching for things like that. There's no chapter titles or any of that kind of stuff. It's very crudely put together, full of misspellings, full of probably bad grammar, because again, it's a transcript. It's just talking. It's not like it's an edited book. And there was this Amazon review. I got a 1-star Amazon review from it. Most of the reviews have been very good, but this one guy gave me a 1-star review. And he said in the very beginning of the review, this is some of the best email information I've ever read, and then he spent the rest of the review going on and on and on about how unprofessional it was, how there's some bad spelling in it, how there's no table of contents, how it's just an interview transcript and lazily put together, and how there's no editing was done to it, and this and that, and all the bad stuff. Now, I could have fought that force. Okay, I could have went in there on Amazon and put, a counter, then there's, you're full of crap and this and that. I didn't do any of that. Or I could have sent an email to my list saying, this guy's an idiot. I could have fought the review like that. I didn't. What I did was I didn't oppose that force, because that, a negative review is force coming at you. And a lot of people unfortunately try to meet that force and they try to fight it and they get nasty and they look bitter and butthurt and all that. I didn't do any of that. I reprinted his entire review in context, so there was no taking out of context. And I basically said, look, he's right. This is a very lazily put together ebook. There's no question about it. It is a transcript. I'm not going to spend time creating a table of contents for a transcript. That's not how it was structured. And then I told the story about how when I bought Gary Halbert's Boron Letters at a time when I really didn't have a lot of money to be buying anything, and that was like a $97 book at the time. Now you can get it free at thegaryhalbertletter.com, at least at the last I checked. But I bought it in this book, and the book is written in his own handwriting. It's just copies of his own handwriting, so it's kind of hard to read. It's his cursive handwriting. There's no table of contents. There's no any of that stuff. It's just a series of 25 or 24 letters that he wrote. And it came in this book that had the cover was missing because Gary Halbert's company was in the Florida heat apparently, and it's like the cover is just melted or something. It had no cover on it. It was the ugliest book you'll ever see. Okay, I have it in my office here. It's ugly. I mean, it does not look professional. It looks like if you didn't know any better, you look at it at a glance and you'd be like, what is this? And what is this? Much less they're charging $100 for it. But I can tell you, because the information inside was so good, I can attribute tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in overall sales between clients that I've worked for and myself and everything else to that book. There's no question about it. But if I'd sat there and, was more worried about if there's a table of contents or whatever, I wouldn't have gotten any of that value out of it. So I told that story in the email. And I said, look, if that stuff's important to you, and I may have been a little bit of a smart ass about it, but I wasn't making fun of the guy or anything. If the guy said this was the best email stuff he'd ever read, but he's more worried about that, he's just not a good customer for me. And you, reader, talking in that email, if you're more worried about that sort of thing, don't buy my products because you're just going to be disappointed. You're not going to like it. You're going to be more worried about the volume of pages and the, in the look of it and all that than the actual information. I am not the guy to buy from. In fact, you should not buy any of my products. And I meant it. It wasn't like some trick. It wasn't some persuasion tactic or anything like that. I really believe that. Like, I don't want people buying from me if that stuff is more important to them than the actual content that they're buying. I get it. I understand that people want it in a certain way and all that, but it's not that. And of course, I amended the ad after that on Kindle to say this is a transcript, because I think that's the right thing to do if that's a problem for people, to let them know. But even more important than that, Jonathan, is the very next day after, or the day that I wrote that email and sent it out, I got an email from that guy who wrote that negative 1-star review. And he said, you know what, you're right. I mean, technically you're right. It's still really good information. And he was, I still don't like the format. I still think it's sloppy. I think it needs to be edited better. It's hard to read, but I changed it to a 4-star review. And I said, that's an intellectually honest guy there. I mean, that you can't ask for more than that of a thing. Now, had I tried to oppose that force though, Jonathan, had I sat there and said, screw you and all this crap and tried to force it, I wouldn't have, not only would I not have gotten a 4-star review from a 1-star review, but I probably would, the guy, for all I know, he may have went on to buy more stuff, but it would have looked bad to everyone, to any of the onlookers too. And rightfully so. So opposing force, sitting there getting in pissing matches and all that, there's a time to do that if you're just having fun or whatever. But when it comes to business and all that, don't oppose force. You're just creating a vulnerability in yourself. Use it, accept that energy, use it like I did in that example. Anybody could do the same for any kind of review-based thing, or even if you just got a negative email from someone saying that you suck, your book sucks, and here's why. Or a service. If you have a service, you get like negative feedback on that. Think of ways not to fight it, but not to oppose it, because you're just going to create a vulnerability, but to use it. And daily emails, nothing is easier than that, than taking something like that, reprinting it in a daily email, acknowledging that what they're saying is probably not wrong, but here's why, it shouldn't matter, assuming that's the case. So very short podcast today, Jonathan. There's no need to talk to hear myself write, speak to hear myself talk. No reason to write to hear myself talk, whatever it is. No need to go on and on and on about that. I think the point is made. Next week, we're going to do another 7 email players rules, and a merry time will be had by all, or at least by you and me. So that's next.
You know what's interesting about that? I think you guys should go back and listen to the last episode, because the opposing of force and using claims to create objections in your emails, I feel like those two things go together, and I thought it was interesting. It was on 2 separate shows. So go back and listen to that. That's a wrap for another BenSettle.com podcast. We'll be back next time.
You've been listening to the BenSettle.com podcast. To get your hands on a free issue of Ben Settle's prestigious $97 per month email players newsletter, simply go to www.bensettle.com.
This is the podcastfactory.com.